Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our webinar, Cherokee and Unicode, case study for where language revitalization meets digital infrastructure. My name is Irlango Charan, and I'll be making introductions for today's event and going over some housekeeping items. Uh, as a reminder, this session is being recorded and it'll be posted on the Unicode Consortium YouTube channel. We've received many questions in advance and we'll address the ones that are of most interest to this topic. And we'll be taking additional questions as time allows. Please submit your questions for the team using the chat or the Q&A feature. The next hour will be handled by our Cherokee expert, starting with a presentation and followed by a question and answer period to address as many of the submitted questions as possible. Let me introduce you to our webinar team. Roy Boney is a Cherokee Nation artist, activist, filmmaker, and language revitalization activist from Tahlequah, Oklahoma. He currently works at Cherokee Film as a Cherokee Language Revitalization Manager, and he is an Emmy award-winning Cherokee Language Media Producer. Prior to this current position, he served as Cherokee Language Program Manager for Cherokee Nation's Language Department for 17 years. As a note, Jeff Edwards and his assistant Zachary Barnes were not able to attend this event due to personal reasons. Marlena Caldas is the Community Marketing and Operations Associate at Unicode, and I'm Yolungo Charan, the Vice Chair of the Community Engagement Team at Unicode. All right, let's get started.
All right. Well, Oceana God, that means hello, everyone in Cherokee language. I'm honored to be here today to talk about this topic here. So, a little background here before we jump into a lot of this. So, as was mentioned in the intro, I worked for 17 years in the language department for Cherokee Nation. And what got me started in that was initially I was working in animation. I was working with students in the local communities here in Oklahoma on how to make Cherokee language animations. And so what was happening, this was in the early or late 90s, early 2000s, and what was happening at that time was the software didn't support our language. So we had to improvise, and basically if we wanted to use subtitles in our language or we wanted to use graphics, like for titles and things in Cherokee language, we had to make them graphics, and that was kind of cumbersome. So uh, eventually I was hired by the tribe, uh, moving from animation to this project. And so when we got there, the Cherokee Nation had started a Cherokee language immersion school. And so I was hired at the tribe to work at the school to create content for the school. So we were doing curriculum and books, animations, posters, you name whatever school has, we'd had them made in Cherokee language. And so that production was kind of difficult because of the lack of Unicode support for syllabary. Uh, it was there, but we didn't know like how it worked, so we didn't quite understand what that even meant. What was Unicode? So basically, this started because I wanted to use the language in media production. So years later, I'm kind of looping back around. I'm getting to do that now, so I'll talk about that towards the end of the talk here. But having said all that, I'll jump right in. So this first slide you see here is it's showing Sequoia's original syllabary. So when he developed this in 1821, he started off with cursive. So on this chart, he made this chart to show how the cursive looked versus how the print would look. So if you look closely, you'll see pairs and they're divided by a little squiggly line. That was him showing, here's the cursive version, here's the print version. So, he developed this with the pen and quill, so it was very curvilinear, very fancy looking. But then when it got to the printing press, they had to modify it and simplify it to, so they could cover it to that metal, so they couldn't keep that very elegant flowing style into it. Um, on this next slide, uh, this is with that same document in the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa. These are Cherokee numbers. And the reason I bring these up is Sequoia, when he was developing the writing system, he felt that we needed numbers too, that weren't, the mainstream, I guess, Western style numbers, the Arabic numbers. He developed this number system. It's fairly complicated to me. I'm not a mathematician or anything, but they work with these kind of additional pairs. These symbols get marks added to them as they get bigger in number. But these numbers were never adopted by the community. But with the language revitalization that's going on now in Oklahoma, there is a movement to try to adopt these numbers and teach these numbers and how teach our students how to use this number system. And with that, we're thinking about possibly approaching Unicode to see if we can get these encoded. But I'll talk a bit more about that too in the talk here. So on the next slide here, you'll see a sample of how the handwriting transitioned from that cursive form I was talking about to, a more simplified print to an actual, printing press. So in 1828, the Cherokee Nation bought a printing press and hired a foundry in the Boston area to develop this set of type that we could use for Cherokee. So this evolution happened fairly quickly. And so this character here is just one sample of the lettering system. There are 86 characters total. This is the character, the vowel sound O that was developed for that. Moving on, uh, jumping ahead in history quite quickly here. So from the printing press that Cherokees had in 1828, uh, basically in between then from the 1960s, every type of printing technology that came out, Cherokee was adapted to it. So there are a lot of different forms of typewriters throughout the early 20th century, late 19th century too. This particular typewriter, this is in one of our museums in Oklahoma, and it shows an early Hermes typewriter from 1960s. So you see the keyboard there, the layout, and inside, when you open up the keyboard itself, we see the hammers, for the lettering. So this type style is what we used for quite a long time until the computer age. So this slide here shows this was a major step forward for us as a community. You may recognize that that's a IBM Selectric typewriter element. These were made, of course, in the 70s and 80s. This element was developed by Cherokee Nation in 1976. The tribe at the time was undergoing a huge revitalization in terms of not just the language, but also its government. For most of the 20th century, the tribal nations governments were appointed, the leadership was appointed by the president. So in this 1970s, we actually had our first elected chief since the end of the 19th century, which was a pretty major deal. So the chief at the time engaged in a lot of language efforts. And in part of that effort, again, they developed this typewriter element. They hired a company in Hawaii called Camwheel to develop this. And so once they bought several of these, they distribute them to the communities here in northeastern Oklahoma for the Cherokee teaching programs. So the image that you see on the right of that typewriter element is actually an excerpt from the first Cherokee language dictionary that was compiled. The entire dictionary was typed using these typewriter elements. I interviewed one of the people at the time who was working on that, and she talked about the process of having to, move that ball out if they wanted to do a bigger font. And plus, it was in English. I was bilingual, so they had to switch out these elements, and it was quite a task. But this dictionary is what we're still using now as the basis for a lot of our Cherokee language documentation. So if you get a Cherokee dictionary now, this is still the basis for it. There's some apps that use this content too. So this was a major boon for us as a community with the technology. So having said all that, in the same era, you can see on this sheet here in the corner the date of 1976. This again, the same era. Herman Zopp, who is a very famous typographer, he designed a lot of computer fonts in the early age of computer, the PC. And he was actually working on a Cherokee font back then. This was I just show this to demonstrate that there was this huge interest in our language. There's always been fascination with the Cherokee syllabary. Uh, the writing system is unique. Some of the characters resemble English, but they don't sound like English. But again, there's been a lot of interest in this, and some have said that Steve Jobs wanted to incorporate this in the first Mac. It never happened, but you can see there was interest in our writing system back then. So I think that's really kind of cool to see. Uh, so again, we'll do a little bit of a jump in the history here. Uh, so here I want to introduce Durban Feeling. Durban was a really huge component of the modern Cherokee Nation, especially in terms of our language revitalization. He was a linguist from the Locust Grove community here in Oklahoma, and like he had a major hand in the dictionary we were talking about, and he was always kind of looking forward, and he was kind of on the cutting edge of technology for that era. So he worked with a company in Louisiana to develop the very first word processor for Cherokee language. So in 1987, they presented this first page of print using a word processor to Chief William Mankiller to talk about the importance of Cherokee language revitalization and the use of technology and computers and how that's going to kind of lead the way where we need to be for our language. So Durbin shared this sheet of this letter with me. Durbin had an extensive archive of language content. And so when we were doing all this work trying to get our community engaged in what Unicode meant and all this, we started doing these educational talks to our community to show this evolution of how we've always used technology in our language. So he shared this with me, and I feel privileged to have access to this because Durbin passed away a few years ago now. So again, everything that he did, we're still carrying that forward in our language programs. So this image here is actually the very first documented Cherokee font that was developed by a Cherokee person. And I show this because, a lot of these developments, like the word processor, Durbin helped with that, but he was working with non-native, engineers and things to get that to happen. But this is developed by Cherokee. So it was called the White Path Cherokee Font. And this was used for a lot of newspapers that were at, independent press at the time. They would publish articles, critiquing Cherokee Nation government and things like that. So it was kind of interesting to see how this was being utilized in the community. And some other community programs were using it to create language content too for teaching. This font was in use for quite a while because it was developed in the early 90s. And so you see the code points above each of the glyphs. This was basically a map to an English character set. So what would happen is, if you didn't have this font, of course, it would show up as just a bunch of English gibberish on your computer. So the challenge of that was, if you didn't have this on your system, if they wanted to share this with someone in another school, they didn't have it. It just was kind of didn't really work. So that was when we just kind of started feeling like, well, how do we make this easier on our community? So, in the late 90s, Durbin Filling worked with Dr. Gloria Sly. Gloria Sly is a Cherokee Nation citizen who spent her career doing a lot of education initiatives. She was the former director for education and cultural education at Cherokee Nation. She was a director of the language program for a while. She's done a lot for us as a tribe. So she and Durbin we're forward looking and they're like, we need to get our language encoded, which is a pretty big deal at the time because, in this era, the internet wasn't really ubiquitous like it is now. And so they're like, we need to make sure our people can use our language and technology. So they worked with Michael Everson, who I believe a lot of you out there know, to make this application for Unicode, for Cherokee to be encoded in Unicode. So this here is showing the Cherokee code point range in Unicode, and it was released in Unicode 3 in 1999. So that was a huge step forward for us. We didn't realize it as a community at the time because it seems they just have it in the background basically, right? So I said it took a while for it to kind of trickle out to us as people. So in 2003, Apple incorporated support for Cherokee keyboards and fonts in Mac OS. Uh, that was a huge, movement forward. But what happened is, again, as a community, we're a very small language community compared to the rest of the world. And it's like, well, what does this mean? How do we get people to understand this? As I mentioned, I was working for the tribe at the time, and several of my colleagues and I were tasked with creating content for the school. And we were, playing around with the system settings. We'd get a new computer and we said, well, there's a Cherokee setting in here. What is this about? Then we started learning about keyboard layouts and font support, and that's when we've kind of figured out, well, this is what Unicode is. This is what this means. So we started doing a lot of community engagement to explain to our community we need to start moving toward just these fonts that are Unicode compliant, basically with the proper code points in that. Because we were having that problem, there was another font that the tribe had made that was in use for quite some time, and again, this was kind of mapped onto an English font. And if you didn't have that font, you couldn't. It just came out as gibberish. So we were having this issue where different communities and different programs were trying to make Cherokee language content, and it just wasn't working as you couldn't communicate correctly. So this aha moment of, Unicode and what that meant. That's when the Cherokee Nation started incorporating this technology, especially, well, they got a lot of MacBooks and put them in the immersion school. So the immersion school students could actually do their work in Cherokee. The teachers could create their lessons in Cherokee. The curriculum team could create books in Cherokee. So the whole thing was just like this massive explosion of Cherokee language content. As we figured out, we can create this on our own much easier. We can share these files with each other too. We eventually set up an email server. There were websites, the children had blogs in Cherokee. I mean, and it was a really, again, another major step forward for us. So as we figured this out, we were like, well, if the syllabary works on, Mac OS at this time, the iPhone was a big deal. This new tech came out. We're like, well, if it works on there, shouldn't it be able to work on an iPhone? And so we kind of took the big leap forward to say, hey, let's contact Apple and ask, can you support our language on this new device? And Apple was like, yes, I think we can do that. So in 2010, they did an OS update for the iPhone at the time to support Cherokee syllabary and a keyboard. The keyboard was a very important step for us for this touchscreen too, because as I mentioned, there are 86 characters in Cherokee. So it was a feat of engineering to figure out how do you get access to all 86 characters from this one screen. So they worked with our language team, our translators, and some of our language tech staff to figure out how do we access all that. So looking at that screen there, you can access all 86 characters pretty quickly. There's kind of like a modified, I guess, like a phonetic keyboard on there too. It's still a brave, it's not phonetic, but I would have to have more time to explain how that would work. But it's very rapid once you figure it out. And you can also just press down a key and it opens up a whole related row. But again, that was a major step forward for us by using this touchscreen technology. So through the years after that, Apple continued supporting Cherokee language every time they released a new device. So, like when you get an Apple Watch, there's Cherokee language support on that. If you have the little Apple TV thing, there's language Cherokee support on that. Just so anything that Apple has, automatically has our language in it now. So that's been a very big thing for us as well to be recognized on that level that Cherokee language can live in this new, kind of this modern tech world, just like everyone else with their language. So that really opened the door for other companies to start wanting to incorporate Cherokee language. We started working with Facebook back in 2009. They had a localization platform where you could actually get the UI into your language. So we started doing that. This was our first foray into localization. That was a new thing for us with like this idea of you're not just translating something into the language, into the UI, you're actually making sure it makes sense culturally for your community. So our translators and our team started figuring this out, and this would lead to a bunch of things later on for us. And I'll talk a bit more about what that meant later too in this slideshow here. And so I said it just kept rolling. The interest and support for our language just kept, as snowballs clipped. Google added language support for us on their search engine. They developed this, on-screen keyboard on Google Search. It's still there if you ever want to access it. Um, so we've got, Google UI keyboard. Uh, they also developed a font for us. That's here on the next slide. You may be familiar with their Noto Sans font family. Uh, the idea is no tofu. So with the blink boxes that may appear if it does not supported that character. So we're in the Noto Sans family now with the Cherokee font. This has become a widely adopted font. We use that for quite a lot of content publications, films, whatever you can name it. It's everywhere now. Um, Moving on, Microsoft started supporting our language. We got to localize the Windows OS. Resulted in a lot of new vocabulary for us. Our translators, kind of start figuring out again localizing things, not just translation, but localizing that. So that led to support for online office products. So like Word, PowerPoint, and all that. You can use a Cherokee UI if you wish. There's some, it supports Cherokee language in it and fonts too. Um, and speaking of the font, next slide here, Microsoft developed a font for us as well called Gadugi. The word Gadugi in Cherokee is about community. It kind of means simple translation is working together, but it's kind of a bit deeper than that. But the idea is you're helping everyone out, move forward, and so this Gadugi font is included on all Windows devices too. So if you have any like a tablet, Surface, PC, whatever it is, we have language support in all Microsoft products as well. This was designed too for UI, so you notice it's a sans serif font, which is a bit different for Cherokee language. We're used to seeing the print version, so this took a bit for our communities to get used to as well. But it's just part of the evolution of moving forward. Uh, this is a sample, Google added Cherokee support for Android. So an Android 5 Lollipop, we got Cherokee language support for that. Uh, a bit later, on the next slide, you'll see they added Cherokee to the Gboard for Google. So we have that's the same keyboard layout that was on the Apple. We were fortunate that these engineers and groups are sharing their knowledge with each other. They could have easily said, "No, this is our format. You can't use it." But it's been open source, so this keyboard layout is actually can be used in all kinds of different touchscreen devices now. So I mentioned earlier, I mentioned the number system in Cherokee. So this is a prototype. Well, it's actually a beta. It does work of a Cherokee numeral keyboard. It was developed by Craig Cornelius, who was at Google. He was one of our big champions there for a long time. And John Ross Jr., who is a translator at Cherokee Nation. John Ross helped move forward the number system quite a lot by doing something that Sequoia didn't. In Sequoia's original number system, there was not a zero in it. So John figured out if we add a zero to this, this will be much more easier to understand. So the idea here is for us to kind of really solidify how this number system works and make sure it can work properly, like on a device. And we would like to explore moving forward with the encoding the number system in the Cherokee, I mean Unicode, get our because with our immersion school, we're starting to teach kids these numbers. And we also have an adult immersion program called the Master Apprentice Program, and they're learning these numbers. So these numbers are kind of getting a resurgence. So again, we'd like to explore encoding these in the future. And that's led to new things like this. We showed typewriters earlier. Cherokee Nation recently partnered with a company called No Pun Intended. You can see their name down in the corner. They have that fun little spelling. The manufacturer a Cherokee keyboard that's just nothing but Cherokee on it, as you can see. Um, all the English writings removed. We added some custom symbols on it. My colleague Jeff Edwards did a lot of this design on it, and with a gentleman too named Don Duggar at the language department. And you can see the numpad there has Cherokee numbers on it, at least the glyphs. In the next slide, you can see a more close-up image of those numbers. Like I said, we do one of the things is they need to see like this used in the community, just kind of out in the public. Uh, this, it's fairly new. Within the last couple of years, it's kind of really exploded. Yeah, like I said, there's people are wearing T-shirts with numbers on them now. You'll see baseball caps. You'll see this in classrooms at the immersion school. But it is a bit different in how it's used. It's not quite base 10, but I'm not the best person to kind of discuss that, but I know it's a bit more complicated than what it seems. But yeah, we do. Once we figure this out, we want to move forward in that idea. So as this kind of keeps going, the developments just allow our community to do more things. This seems simple, like doing a talking book in our language sounds like a simple idea, but without Unicode support, importing, our text into the book and having it highlight as it moves across, as the words are read aloud, just doing that kind of simple development for apps and things is really important that we have that Unicode support. Otherwise, I don't think this would be, we couldn't do this, in the tools that are out there now. So again, that Unicode support lets us do, we can do app programming now. I mean, there's a lot of things that are happening for us. And I like to show this because this is really fun to me. Yeah, font development is kind of a highly specialized skill, but we have people in the community now that are actually making fonts on their own. There are free apps, out there that you can develop fonts. And this lady here, her name's Rayleigh Eastwood. You can see her username there is in syllabary. She is currently she's a teacher at an immersion school, and she just started making fonts on her own for a classroom. Again, without Unicode, that's not something that could be done. Uh, and she's just kind of experimenting with the letter forms. And so we like to see this kind of spontaneous development, of fonts among our community members. And so having said that, we do have, professional font developers at a Cherokee out there now. Chris Scalern, who's based in Tulsa, he's a Cherokee Nation citizen. He recently developed this font called Lava Cherokee, and he won a major recognition from the Type Directors Club for this font. So, he's just making waves in the mainstream design space. And seeing this is, again, to me, it's kind of makes me proud to know there's people out there that are taking this seriously and like running with it and kind of moving forward in our evolution of our language. You can see that it's in print, oblique, you got bold, you got italic. I mean, before we just had kind of one mode of Cherokee. Now we get to see all this kind of cool stuff coming together. So I mentioned apps. So Cherokee Nation has long wanted to make a Cherokee dictionary app. So on the left is a screenshot from the official Cherokee Nation dictionary app that incorporates the Durban Filling Dictionary I alluded to earlier. Uh, this is a database, and it's got a really strong back end running this, and you can search it, you can record it, you can listen to it. Uh, Google has done something similar because a lot of our content now, our language content, is being released publicly and open sourced. So if you can find this content, we have people developing things like that for us. Google has always been a strong partner with Cherokee Nation. So I know they were working with some of our language partners on this over there at the language department. Uh, some of the content's similar, but they're also, when you got the different development teams, you can see how the different teams kind of come up with their own thing. So it's great seeing this kind of development happening. And so with all this data and all this tech being used in Cherokee, it's also great to see things like this. These are just some pictures from road signs, street signs that are here in Tahlequah. So we're using our language on basic things like that too. We can send these to state and local agencies, and they can actually, create these street signs that follow, the regulations that are needed for, municipal street codes and things like that. So these are appearing everywhere, in Tahlequah and in other communities here in Cherokee Nation. Uh, Again, it seems simple, you may take that for granted in your language, but if you don't have that and then you do have it, you see like, wow, that's something you didn't realize you were missing. And it's strong communication. It's showing our community and especially our kids that it's just normal to see this. For me, it's exciting to see, but I'm hoping for the next generation, like that was like, hey, it's always been there. That's great. But this has been another move forward for us, I think, as a community, just to see it used in things like this. It's also been used in a lot of like during COVID, a lot of the announcements from the health departments were translated in Cherokee. We're all were virtual. We were having these translated and sending them out their email to these agencies, and they were creating these documents. So again, without Unicode, that would have been a much harder task to pull off. So I'm going to change gears a little bit here too. So a lot of what I've been talking about was, like I mentioned, I worked at Cherokee Nation's language department for quite some time. Uh, so it reached to the point where we started getting into production. We wanted to create Cherokee language productions. And so we formed a partnership with Amazon Prime and MGM. And so we started working on a localization of the Rings of Power. And this font here actually was designed by Chris Scalern, who I mentioned earlier. We contracted him, say, hey, we're doing this project. we need you to come in and develop a font for us. And that's was so cool to see. So we're still in production on season one, but this is the official art that came out to make the announcement. Hopefully, we'll be able to release this later this year. But it's this whole process of localization I mentioned earlier. Our team got used to localizing software, but that those skills translated over to localizing productions and media. So we're taking scripts from Amazon, and our team sits there and translates them and then localizes it and dubs to the matches the dub on screen. We're also creating bilingual content in Cherokee language. So we're using our syllabary and software like Final Draft, which is, the industry standard in Hollywood for screenwriting software. This is just a page from an animation project that we're working on. The dialogue is written in Cherokee because we are having these spoken in Cherokee. So we write the dialogue in syllabary and phonetics too. But yeah, it's great to see this. Again, this seems minor to some people, but to me, it's a pretty big deal to be able to do this in our language. Uh, so this here is a little short video clip. There's no sound, but I'll talk about what you're looking at. So this dubbing process, requires us to bring an actor into a recording booth, and there's a script on screen, but we're dubbing, so we're matching what's the lip movements on screen. So we're trying to avoid that old, the old martial arts movies where the voices didn't match when they spoke in another language. So we're making sure that as they're in the booth recording, this software is called Voice Cue, and it supports Cherokee language in it. So the words go by on screen at different paces. So you can increase the size and enlarge it, condense the speed of it. It's very sophisticated, advanced software, but we're using Cherokee language to dub these productions in our language. Voice Cue is actually one of the Hollywood standard pieces of software. They do this for other languages. So when you're watching Netflix and at the end of the credits, you see the localization credits. Most of them are using this software to do that process. So again, we're pretty happy that Cherokee can do this as well, and our talent can go in and do this in the language. Uh, this here is just another video clip, and it's showing some teleprompter software we use. Cherokee Film has a full-fledged film studio. So we have a big XR wall so we can do virtual productions, and we have teleprompters and things so our talent can get up in the front of the camera and actually read off a screen. This is from a script that we use for a series called Let's Talk Cherokee. Let's Talk Cherokee is like an elementary level series in which we teach Cherokee to the general public. It's a blend of live action and animation. And just last year, our team won an Emmy for the first time for this kind of work. So it's awesome again to see how far things are going. And again, without Unicode, this seems like simple things to a lot of people, but again, to me, it's a really big deal that we can exist in this production world. Um, this here, I wish I could show what these are for, but these are title cards for an animated series. Our team at Cherokee Film is making an animated series in Cherokee language. We are using the Unreal Engine from Epic Games to make these animations. We're doing motion capture animation, and so it's a really sophisticated pipeline that we built. And we're doing this, of course, with just text. We can send translations for these title cards to our animators. They can import that in straight as text into the Unreal Engine, and they can develop these in a 3D text, files. And so these are going to serve as title cards for each episode. Uh, you if you want to see some of this work in the future, later this year, they'll be released at our website at oco.tv. That's the Cherokee Film website. There will be a link to that at the end of the presentation. But yeah, this is kind of where we're moving forward on everything. It's pretty exciting. We went from just being paper and pencil, and now we're doing full-fledged animation film productions in Cherokee language, using our fonts. So yeah, it's a major step forward again.
All right. Thank you so much, Roy. Let's get to our Q&A now. As mentioned before, we received many questions in advance, and we'll address these during this period. And we'll be taking additional questions as time allows. Just please remember to ask questions relevant to the topic of this event. And our time is limited, so I apologize in advance if we can't get to all your questions. Without further ado, let us go to the first question. And this is from Stephen Loomis. Um, what would you suggest to other communities? Any suggestions for the technical industry in finding or relating to communities?
Yeah, that is a really good question because here at Cherokee Nation, we are surrounded by other tribes. There's like 39 tribes, I believe, in the state of Oklahoma. Uh, and there are a couple that have their own writing system or developing their writing system. A good example is the Osage Nation. They have a glyph system that they developed, and that's been encoded into Unicode too now. Uh, and some of the other languages may have not a full-fledged alphabet of their own, but there are certain special characters that are just like unique to them. So they've been approaching us like, how do you do this? And so we've been trying to do some education on what Unicode is. Because I know for the general public, most people don't even know what that is, or even what that means when you say, "Are you? Is your language encoded in Unicode?" Uh, so it's just that basic education of reaching out to other communities, other language communities, if they wanted to have their language encoded and use it for this kind of thing. Like that's the first step, really, is make sure you get it encoded if you want to engage in this technology world. And like for the tech industry, uh, we were fortunate that because of Sequoia's invention, we've had a long history of visibility for Cherokee language because his story is unique in that he's credited as the only single person who created a writing system on their own. So that's always been like a historical curiosity. And as I mentioned earlier, Steve Jobs was famously interested in typography and writing systems and stuff. And so apparently that was kind of like a part of the Apple ethos was to include, scripts and things into their OS and all this. And so we had that visibility. Uh, there are a lot of different tribal consortiums and events that may be helpful to attend or to reach out to that talk about these things. Um, Again, for us, we were fortunate we had that connection, and when we reached out to them, they were willing to help us. And as we've seen, the the examples that have followed, I know like Apple and Google in particular have been really helpful in reaching out to tribes. So is Microsoft, and getting that support is out there. And I think uh, if you, as a community, want to help tribal nations and other communities, I think everyone's would be open to that.
Great. Our next question is from Karan Mishra. He's asking, what does Cherokee's usage look like today, especially among the youth, and especially with usage in speaking versus writing?
Yeah, so Cherokee is endangered, like most native languages in the United States and Canada too. They're all classified as endangered. So we're in a situation where people of my generation see I'm a Cherokee learner myself. I'm not fluent in Cherokee. My family is like my parents' generation. They're all fluent speakers, but it seems like that generational break occurred with my generation. So now like people my age and people like our children are going through schools like the immersion school, trying to revive the language. And we're finally getting to the point where we're about two generations out now. So like the grandchildren of like people of me are a little bit older, their babies, the grandchildren are starting to learn Cherokee as their first language. There's a handful of them where that's happening, but we're starting to reverse that trend of language loss. And our first language speaker population is roughly, I think, 1,700 living speakers that count as a first language speaker. So we're trying to make sure as they pass, because they're all elderly now, they're like 70 years and older. Uh, we are still at a kind of a we're losing more than we're gaining, but we're starting to reverse that trend. So the youth, they're used to seeing their language in places like this in tech, especially at the immersion school. The school is fully immersive in Cherokee. From It starts now at 6 months, so they have a baby immersion program, then they have a preschool program, then it goes from kindergarten to the eighth grade, and it's all in Cherokee language. So that generation of kids is coming up learning Cherokee. Uh, their writing, I would say, is a bit better than their speaking, but they're starting to kind of catch up to each other. because the writing, is the easier part to learn in this for us as Cherokees. The speaking is a bit more difficult because it is a tonal language. So catching all the nuances and the tones and sounds is a very important part of it, and which a lot of that's not captured in writing. You can add diacritics and things, but still you have to kind of know what you're reading to understand some of it.
The next question is from Jesse Kahn. How can type designers work with the Cherokee Nation to create new fonts that support the syllabary?
Yeah, that's a really great question. We need a lot more fonts. I know there's a lot more than there used to be. For a while, there was like just a handful. We could like less than 20 fonts you could name that were Cherokee. There's a lot more than that now. Um, I think just reaching out to the Cherokee Nation itself. The Cherokee Nation has a language department, a full-fledged program that has its own website. There's contact info there. Uh, Going to events like TypeCon. Several years ago, I went to that, and that's some colleagues and I went to TypeCon. If you don't know what that, I'm sure a lot of you do know what that is, but that conference, it's a gathering of international typographers every year, and people go there and discuss font development and glyphs and kind of get to geek out about letter forms. And we went there and gave a talk about Cherokee syllabary quite some time ago, and that talk resulted in a lot of new fonts being developed. We reached new typographers, and that process is still happening. I know I keep mentioning Chris Scalern. He's been a very big proponent of font development for us. But yeah, just reaching out to Cherokee Nation and attending events like that, I think that would help a lot. And finding that network of people, like how would you design font? Because we've had people too that didn't. There are fonts that have been designed that you could tell there wasn't a lot of interaction with a knowledgeable Cherokee, someone that's knowledgeable in the language. So some of the glyphs were like look too much like the other. They would flip the design of some of them because some of them are too similar to other character shapes and things. So yeah, just having those conversations with a Cherokee, you know, community member is a good first step.
Next question is from Craig Cornelius, whom you mentioned earlier in the presentation. Uh, he asks, how has the unique Cherokee syllabary affected the vitality of the Cherokee language? And how has technology changed the culture?
Yeah, I think without the syllabary, if we didn't have it, I think our language would be in much more dire straits than it is. When Sequoia developed it in 1821, there are estimates by the end of the 19th century, there are over 1 million printed pieces of Cherokee language that were made. That ran the gamut from math books to, Bibles to newspapers to cultural, documentation about practices and medicine and things. And there were pamphlets published in the late early 20th century that dealt with the Spanish flu. So there's a lot of knowledge that was embedded in these kind of documents. So that content uh, we're mining now as learners. A good example, when the COVID shutdown was at its peak, our translators were going through this old pamphlet they found of that showed how do you deal with flu, how do you clean up your space, disinfect this and that. They were finding a lot of vocabulary that wasn't really common anymore, and finding that in that document. So it's a good combination of having all that history of writing and preserving some Cherokee knowledge and vocabulary. So we have that, and again, if we didn't have that, when we're trying to revitalize the language now, we got a good solid basis to stand on. In terms of technology changing the culture, it's always been there, as I mentioned. Going back to again to Sequoia, you can see every major evolution of the writing system occurred as new technology came along. So Cherokees were always adapting to that, incorporating the technology into the daily lives of our communities. I think now with a lot of our kids, especially in the immersion school, they've never known a world where Cherokee wasn't on their phone. Like they can text their parents and grandparents, they text each other, they do social media in Cherokee language. Our tribal government has a communications arm, and they do a lot of content in Cherokee, and they utilize the syllabary. So I think as the tech evolves, so does our culture along with it. So it's been a very interesting thing to watch. Of course, now the big thing is AI and like how do you deal with that in language? And that's still a conversation we're still trying to navigate.
Next, from Winston Scott, how do we motivate the companies with vast resources to invest in indigenous languages to ensure equity in education tools?
Yeah, there's a funny thing we kind of joke about sometimes in this regard, but it's really true. You know, when I mentioned our collaboration with Apple, you know, people are asking, well, how much are you paying Apple? How much are you doing this? And we never paid them a dime. They were the people we were in contact with were just, you know, they were of a mind that their work needed to help, you know, communities. And so we were working with typographers and engineers and but a good offshoot of that work that we did with them was even though we didn't pay Apple any money, they got a lot of publicity out of it. You know, in the media when this came out, you know, they're like this tribe is using technology, and then our tribal communications office did an analysis of like how much press that was, and it was like several $1 million of press just from these, you know, all the media coverage. So you know, there's a uh, good give and take here between when you're working with these kind of things. Even in that regard, is getting the publicity, but uh, I think, you know, like these companies that have just such far reaches and these resources, you know, they do have the power to change the world for people in small ways and large ways. And for you know, just for tribal communities, you know, as being some, you know, the indigenous people here in the North America, it's like, you know, a lot of these resources and things that you're taking for granted in terms of, you know, your headquarters are based on tribal lands, you know, like just giving back to, you know, the history there and, you know, making ensuring that the local communities are, you know, benefiting from these resources they have too. And doing something like working with language communities is a very big part of that because you know, language is more than just simple communication. It also embeds a lot of knowledge in these words. So when you're speaking with an elder and they discuss or try to like tell me as a learner what something means, it they can get really deep really quickly. And it's more than just surface level knowledge. Like so if when you lose a language, there's a whole world that's lost. So if they could, you know, help support tribal communities in this regard, they're saving more than just words. They're saving, you know, lifeways and knowledge.
Um, the next question from Jacob Ford, what is the best resource for navigating seemingly duplicate characters as a non-native speaker?
That's an interesting question. So, like I mentioned, for us, you know, some of the glyphs look like English characters, you know, and it's according to the historical record when they were Sequoia made the syllabary, but then they tried to go to the printing press, they need to modify it. They were looking at other, you know, writing systems. So like Greek and Cyrillic, you can see some characters that look like they're lifted from that appear in the syllabary. Uh, but again, the shape of it is not the sound that you associate with it. So like you may see a Cherokee character that looks like the capital D. That's a Cherokee vowel for awe. But uh, you know, it looks like a duplicate character. It looks like another language's character. And yeah, I don't know how you would best, you know, address that. I mean, in terms of, you know, it's almost more just kind of learning the writing system. For me, you know, I grew up I grew up with this Cherokee speaker, and you know, we always had Cherokee content in the house, like a Bible and like a newspaper and things like that. And I was fortunate to learn Cherokee from my dad, like the writing and the reading of it. And so just really just kind of getting used to seeing that and associating that with like for me for Cherokee. And so I've managed to successfully kind of recognize, you know, when is it a it's more about context, you know, when I see these characters in context, I know that's a Cherokee word versus that's not an English character in that word. Uh, but it is a challenge for people who have not come up with that background. I've come across learners who get really confused when they're trying to write Cherokee sometimes because in their mind they're still associating that character shape with an English sound. Like I mentioned, the one that was like a capital D is an all character. There's one that was like a capital English E. That's a G sound. So I can see how that is kind of a problematic sometimes. It's just really just a matter of just kind of learning that, and I guess kind of trying to train your mind to recognize when you're in one language or another. I guess code switching, I guess, would be a maybe way to put it.
The next question comes at it from a slightly different angle. This is from Hrant Papazian. Is it possible to further distance Cherokee letter forms from the Latin script?
Yeah, see that's been the an actual conversation that's been we've been having among Cherokee learners. Uh, So in that very first slide, what we saw Sequoia's writing, one you could see the cursive, and that cursive shape was nothing like, what you see now. It doesn't resemble any known characters until it got modified for the printing press. And so a lot of our really, hardcore second language learners now are trying to, they want to revert back to that and make that the standard syllabary, for people. Uh, and there is the equivalent, of course. Sequoia made that chart, so we know, the ones that look like the Latin character set. We know what that is in Sequoia's equivalent cursive. So we could, we do have a font that is, with those glyphs. So it's since it's in Unicode, we can type it. Uh, but it's not very popular yet among the general public. I think since we've had that Cherokee script for so long that looks like Latin, some of it, it was hard to, again, kind of switch people's thinking about what that would look like. And if we went back to Sequoia's original, a good example of this is when we introduced the Gadugi Sans Serif Cherokee font to our translation team. And the translation team are all first language speakers. They were just like, this is almost appalling because they weren't used to seeing just these basic shapes without the serifs on it. Eventually, they got used to it and they understood why this change. But they were when they took to it, it happened pretty quickly. But even out in the community, people who aren't working in language directly, they would say, "Why are you changing our language?" We weren't changing the language; it was just that glyph shape. Uh, so it would be a challenge, I think, to get back to that original cursive, but there are people who are trying. So I would be curious to see how that would go too, because I personally do like Sequoia's original cursive, but again, that's just a personal preference.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. This one comes from Gary Wade. Has there been any efforts to use LLMs to provide translations for software applications and frameworks? And maybe along with that, you can just address anything that you said you were talking through AI, trying to navigate that. So any other things related to the LLM AI space?
Yeah, at the moment, there are like people doing it on their own. Like there are some researchers out there that are, developing, they've been adding Cherokee vocabulary to LLMs. But in terms like of officially, the tribe has not done that with Cherokee language yet. There's some explorations in that space. There's conversations happening. Our tribe, our Chief Hoskin, signed a executive order to assign a task force to start researching this. That task force also led to the opening of a task force on data centers and things like that. So our tribe is looking at this in a very serious manner. And one of our concerns, of course, is how do as I mentioned earlier, the language is not just communication, but there's a lot of knowledge in that. And so a lot of this is cultural knowledge that's sensitive. Like, we don't want some of this going to people who shouldn't have it. So like, how do you navigate that? Like if you add, uh, uh, we have like ancient prayers and medicine formulas that we don't want out there. And if someone loads that into a LLM, what does that mean? Is it corrupting that knowledge and that data? Like, so yeah, we're discussing this, and we haven't honestly come to any solid conclusion yet because the whole AI thing is changing so rapidly too. I know someone was going to come up with one eventually. Again, I know there are individuals out there that aren't sanctioned through Cherokee Nation that are exploring this and doing this, but from an official standpoint, from the tribe itself, that's not happened yet.
Wow. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think we're all, trying to figure this out too. So it's interesting to hear that perspective. I think we're at the end of our time, so I think we should wrap up now. Um, so again, thank you so much, Roy. Um, and um, Here are some links that you've helped provide regarding Cherokee and Unicode that we hope that you all will find useful. These will be made available in the slide notes that we'll be able to send out along with the recording. I'd like to also acknowledge and thank our organizational members and industry and media partners of Unicode that support the work that happens at Unicode, um, which includes preserving digitally disadvantaged languages like Cherokee, as you've heard today. And now I'd like to thank Roy for sharing the work that the Cherokee Nation has been doing and your insights with all your answers in the Q&A. Thanks to our logistics team for today and leading up to today in making the event possible. And finally, thanks to all of you in attendance for making the event a success. We plan to have the recordings from the event available in the coming weeks. A survey should be sent out within 24 hours of this event, so please provide any feedback that you'd like for us to share with us. And for general questions regarding Unicode, please visit home.unicode.org. And we hope that you stay connected for more information, future events, and please feel free to share any of the information that we share with you today. And have a great rest of your day or evening.